Well, hello there. This is D, and welcome to Uneven. Oh, that felt good. I wasn't planning on opening with a deep breath, but I just took one and hang on one second. I just leaned my head back here against the cushion of the sofa. I'm hanging out in the basement. It's a nice place of solitude. We all need that place of solitude where we can decompress and recenter ourselves. And for me, that's the basement. Hang on, one more of these. Oh, have you tried that? Boy, that feels good. Almost tingles through my body. Take a deep breath in and then let an audible breath out, maybe with a hum or just vocalizing it like I just did. Hang on, one more. Whoa. It's almost like taking a drug there or something, but boy, that felt good. This morning I was a little more emotional. I am one of those guys who has a little more emotion running through me at times. That's why I struggle with anxiety. That's why I struggle with depression sometimes, and that's why I do this podcast. I'm an emotional guy. I'm also very logical. It's weird because I was a computer programmer and stuff for years. I got both sides. Don't ask me to define myself because it's going to take a long time for me to do that. I'm all over the map. But since I started recording this podcast, Uneven, I've had the thought that I wanted to do a series on books. And maybe not even just books. Maybe we'll talk also about, YouTube videos or trainings or whatever. But I'm going to start out talking about books. And I'm just going to call it Book Report. And dedicate one episode to books that I've found helpful, that have really helped me get through some of the darkest times in my life. Starting in college and then beyond, periodically I'd have bouts of clinical depression and go to counseling, and it would take me months to get out of it. I visualize it like that rabbit hole, like, you have some depression, you have some sadness, but then some point you fall into the hole and you can't find your way out, and you do eventually, but it's like you cross that threshold. So now getting back out is you kind of have to start from scratch again. And of course, coming off benzodiazepines, I had severe anxiety and depression and all kinds of complications for the past 10 years dealing with that. So I'm familiar. I wouldn't do this podcast if I wasn't familiar with those dark times. One of the things that helped me the most were books. Were just typical self-help books. I know people call them pop psychology, whatever, and I'm not about to saying that they're the panacea for our problems, which they're not. But I have this philosophy around learning that has worked well for me, and that is basically, if whatever I spend time doing, whether it's reading an entire book or watching a long video or a movie or a training program or something, wherever it is you get your information or go to a class, if I walk away with one good idea, one good sustainable idea, then it's a win. Now, many times I come away with several. But if I just have one that sticks with me, one that I can carry forward and helps me in my life going forward, then it was worth my time. My philosophy revolves around, I don't think there's one perfect book out there. Now, some of you maybe of more of a faith might believe that, the Bible or the Quran or something is, that's that book, or the Talmud or whatever it is that book that is the perfect book. And I understand that belief and I respect that belief. I've just never had that belief. I'm more, there's so many sources, science, the cosmos, the all the different religions, all the different walks of life, and practicality, and psychology, and philosophy. I get mine from wherever I get it. It comes in a lot of different methods. And so I'm always seeking. Maybe that's the best term for myself, is I'm a seeker. I'm looking for answers, and I love the process, and I'm curious, and I'm okay that I only get one thing out of these sometimes. But anyway, I've read a lot of books. Some of them really hit me and were excellent, and some of them, I wish I hadn't spent the money. But I wanted to start a series called The Book Report. And today I want to do the first one. And this one actually came up this weekend. My wife went down to help a friend down in Florida, and she's really been struggling. I don't want to go into details. It's her own. I just want to go to details. I don't like sharing anybody's stories or details about that, without, of course, asking permission. That's not what I do. But she was struggling, and so finally my wife texted me last weekend wanted to ask me about that one book that I read a long time ago that helped me. And I had to think about it. I couldn't remember the title or the author, but I finally, and since I'm cleaning out my basement right now, it's in boxes. I went through all these boxes and finally found the book. And I just took a picture of it and texted it to her, and I think she ordered it. So I'm hoping this book spoke to her. But it got me thinking that I've always wanted to do this book report series here on the podcast, and maybe the time is now. So, welcome to episode 1. I mean, this is episode 40 something, but welcome to the first of our series on book reports. And I decided this is probably the perfect one to start with, because when I came off benzos, this was the first one that really helped me. Now, I'm not saying this is the best book I've written. I'm not starting off with my top book necessarily. And it is what many would call a pop psychology type of book. It's, a self-help book written by somebody, and I understand that. And I'm not saying this is the great book. What I'm saying is this one helped me, and maybe there's something in it that might help you. So what I like to do, what I think I'm going to do on this series, is pick like 5 or 10 pieces or ideas or pieces of advice from it, just randomly. I mean, I'm going to go through it as I talk to you and look at it. But one thing I do in a lot of my books is I highlight the hell out of them. I underline them. I put stars. I write little notes. In fact, on this book, this is the only book that I've shared with a friend who also wrote notes in it. And so this has notes in it from me and from him. And he read my notes and I read his notes, and it was an interesting process. So today's book is titled From Panic to Power: Proven Techniques to Calm Your Anxieties, Conquer Your Fears, and Put You in Control of Your Life, by Lucinda Bassett. Lucinda Bassett is somebody who has suffered from anxiety herself, and she wrote a book, and it's one that, it was a national bestseller, and it came out in 1990 something. What is it? Let me look here. 1995. So this is almost 30 years old. So a lot of the books I cover will be more recent, and I guarantee there's a lot of good books that have come out since then. So I want to share just a couple lines here from her introduction. I think this is the third paragraph, and she wrote the following. I lived a great deal of my life controlled by a serious anxiety disorder. It may sound strange, but now I consider my anxiety a gift. Yes, that's right, a gift. After suffering for years with fear and dread, along with a host of debilitating physical symptoms, I was finally forced to do something about it. Once my feelings of being out of control had escalated to where I felt that I could no longer function, I started to look for answers. And I think that's a good intro to where she's coming from and what she is speaking about. But she shared so many things in this intro that were just dead on for me. She mentions that her father's alcoholism created chaos and additional feelings of insecurity, and I had an alcoholic mother, and I could relate to that. And then she said something that really struck me. And she mentioned the following, quote, "As a teenager, I suffered from eating disorders and irritable bowel syndrome. I began avoiding situations where I couldn't come and go as I pleased, situations where I couldn't be in control." When I read that, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because that was me. I've suffered with IBS since I was a baby. I had my first, I think I mentioned this just recently, but I had my first upper GI at 6 months, my first pre-ulcer at 5 years, and I've had a bad stomach my whole life. And I learned later in life that it was completely connected to my anxiety and to my feelings. But reading this in a book about anxiety, just out of the blue, reading that hit me, and it said, and it just told me, she gets it. She understands where I come from. She gets it, and it only made me want to read more. One of the pages she mentioned, "Let me suggest that you avoid setting a goal to be normal." I love this because that is something I've dealt with constantly on the Benzo Free podcast. So many people want to get back to the normal, want to get back to the way their life was, want to, how long until I'm normal again in the recovery? And I think that thought process is part of our problems. And I think that carries over into with anxiety 100%. And that we just want to be normal. We want to be like everyone else. Well, first of all, there is no one everyone else. Everybody has problems. Everybody. And for us to think that we just want to be those people who seem to have it all together, I guarantee you, they don't have it all together. Nobody has it all together. Nobody does. How about that new you? Let's move on to that new you. But that's so hard for us because we feel we've lost something. Whether it's from benzos, whether it's from anxiety, whether it's just from this downturn and depression that's been going on lately, whatever it is causing it, we feel like we've lost something. And we want it back. And I get that. I do. I understand that. But that's not possible. We can never go back to exactly where we were before. Nor should we. We need to move forward. In another section, she mentions that anticipation is far worse than reality, and whoa, that's so true. I don't want to say 100% of the time, but sure, 99.9% of the time, our worry is far worse than what actually happens. We go to worst case scenarios. Boy, we are good at that. We are really good at figuring out the worst case that could happen, the what ifs, and we can obsess on those. We are good at that. It's where we excel. For those of us who struggle with anxiety, we know how to worry because we've had practice and we know how to do this right. But it's also flawed thinking. It is so flawed. And I think there's a sense of control in it. I think there's a sense that if we think the worst case that might happen and we can handle that and we can convince ourselves, then everything else is okay. Or if we think the worst case and we can avoid that and we can find a way around that, then we don't have to worry about it. We keep trying to solve the problems before they've ever happened. And the downside of it is we spend our whole lives trying to solve problems that don't happen. Instead of waiting and letting life happen, having the confidence to know I can handle it, whatever it is, and then dealing with it at the time. And the beauty of that is that those 2 weeks before that haven't been completely ruined by obsession. I am really good at that, so I can relate. But I love what she said about anticipation is far worse than reality, because it is, and it's flawed thinking. We need to help deconstruct that flawed thinking about any situation and stop focusing on the negatives. I suffer from what she suffers from too, which is IBS related to anxiety and fear and all that kind of stuff. And the problem is the more I get anxious about a situation, the more my stomach gets upset, and the more likely I'm going to need to find a bathroom. And what if I can't find a bathroom at that time? And boy, that's a fear of mine. And yes, this is not things that people talk about much because people are afraid to talk about it because it makes us look bad. Let's look for another one here. One of the things she mentions in here is about control. She talks a lot about control, and I think that's such a huge part of anxiety and stress and worry. Because really what we're worried about truly is losing control, not being in control of a situation. Those of us with anxiety, with constant ruminations and looping thoughts and all that kind of crazy stuff that we go through and obsessions, most of those thoughts are fear-based because we can't control the situation we're in or we're about to be in. I do that all the time. I totally relate to that. But those who suffer with anxiety, most of this revolves around fear and control. We desperately need to control situations because we're afraid we're not going to be able to handle what may come. And yet, when you allow yourself just to be and just to experience things and not to try to control them, you'll be surprised. You can. You can handle things. You can handle extreme things. I've recently handled some extreme things in my life. I just went through the death of a friend who couldn't handle what she was going through anymore. And while that's still affecting me and I still am struggling with it and it still is a significant factor in my life, I'm managing it. I'm here recording this for you today. My life's changed a lot, and I definitely, because of that and because of my ongoing benzo stuff and stuff with COVID and other symptoms and everything, a lot of things have happened in the last 4 years or whatever for me that I'm dealing with, and this was another one on top of it. But I've gotten through that, and I'm getting through it. And while my life is different and I'm struggling, definitely struggling at times, I'm getting through it. We get through amazing things, horrific things people do. Does it leave its mark? Yeah, sometimes it does. But it doesn't have to be always a negative mark. It could be a positive one. It could be a learning we take away from that. It's all how we view things. But sometimes, and some of my greatest times, have been when I let go of control. On the Florida road trip that I opened up this podcast with, I mentioned about how the first part of that trip, JB, my buddy, planned it. He planned all the hiking. I didn't even know where we were going. I knew we were going to be in, Tennessee, Georgia area, but I had no idea where these trails were, what they were going to be like, how far out we were going. I just let him plan it because I'm such a controller. That was so hard for me to do. I'm a trip planner extraordinaire. Why? Because I want to control the situation. I want to get the most out of it. And I want to, not have to face my issues. I don't want to be, I don't want to be anxious the whole time. And yet sometimes over planning things, I wind up more anxious. But the times that I let him plan when we went on these hikes and I didn't even worry about it were probably the best parts of the trip. That's a good lesson for us to pick up on. And I think that's a good lesson for us to try to use in our lives, is that even if it's just going out one night with friends, if you can get out of the house, and some of you still aren't quite there yet, but go out one night with friends or your spouse or somebody and just say, I want you to plan everything we do. I don't need to know where we're going. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens. We're so afraid, I think, something bad's going to happen. We're going to be embarrassed. We're going to be shamed. We're going to be, or just unsafe. Boy, I realized over time how many things have come back to that infantile emotion of being unsafe. I don't say infantile like I'm demeaning it. I'm saying infantile in the fact that it starts when we were an infant. And much of our fears, including my own, come from things that happened in those first 6 months of life. And then they've built up over time. But boy, control and anxiety, those are two things that go hand in hand. And letting go of anxiety, of control, learning to let go of a little bit of control here and there can definitely help our anxiety. Okay, this is a paragraph that opens up chapter 1. And boy, I think it's really good for those of us with severe anxiety to learn about ourselves, the positive side of things. And this is what she said. Here's the good news. You're special. If you are someone who experiences more than the average amount of anxiety, you are full of potential for greatness. Why? Because you probably have above average intelligence. You are highly creative with a fabulous imagination. You are detail-oriented and analytical. These are wonderful traits that can make you extremely successful and enable you to accomplish great things. Unfortunately, people with anxiety disorders tend to use their attributes to scare themselves. They over-intellectualize, over-analyze, and use their creativity to envision the worst possible scenarios. Used in a negative way, our wonderful traits can make us sick. Boy, I love that paragraph because that's kind of, I think she summed up in one paragraph what so many of us experience with anxiety, but there's really good news in there. Most of us are more intellectual, maybe a little more intelligent, more creative. I mean, it takes a very creative brain and an intelligent brain to think up these scenarios that scare the hell out of us. So that's something to keep in mind. I just think it's something to keep in mind. One of the things she talks about is negative self-talk. It makes you feel bad. She mentions makes you feel bad, sad, angry, helpless. It slowly chips away at your own self-confidence, at your own self, just sense of self, this negative self-talk. And we all do it. I do it a lot. But we often attack ourselves. And one of the things she suggested in here was to carry around a pocket-sized spiral notebook. And I underlined this and highlighted it because it's something I started to do and it helped. Where you can just write down your negative thoughts that happen and how often. So every time you have a negative thought about yourself, you write it down and do that for like a week and then review those. And there's a lot more stuff she gives in the book. I'm not going to talk about related to that and how to process that because, again, I don't want to overshare because if you really like this, go check out her book. But I think it's another good tool that she talks about of helping to notice what we're feeding ourselves. What messages are we feeding ourselves? And then sometimes you can look back on that and you're thinking, oh my God, no wonder I felt I was going crazy. Because all I would feed myself are these horrific thoughts. And I have a friend going through this right now, and I totally get where she's at, where she just can't get out of, the term I used when I was talking to my wife about this was she can't seem to get out of her own way. The negative ruminations just keep coming and coming. And she feels like she's in a place now where her life has no future. And yet, all evidence to the contrary. But she can't see that. She can't see that. Anyway, I think that's an interesting little thing. All right, let's find another couple here. She does have a whole chapter in here on medication. To medicate or not to medicate. And, of course, that's one, and she has a section on anti-anxiety medication. Since I have become kind of a, I guess SME might be the word, subject matter. I'm not a matter expert in benzodiazepines. I don't understand them chemically much at all, so I'm not about to say that. But I may have become near expert level on understanding the complications of coming off those drugs because I've worked with hundreds of people coming off benzodiazepines. I myself have come off them. I've been on several research teams, so maybe I've reached the level not of expert but of knowledgeable resource. How about if we put it that way? But I agree with some of the things she said, but I have to disagree with some. especially when relating around benzodiazepines and addiction and the whole brain chemistry thing, which I'm not sure is as true as we thought it was at one point. Over medicating is a significant problem. I know this because I work with so many people. So I don't necessarily agree with that chapter. And again, that's the thing about books, and I wanted to mention that because there are going to be things in books that don't fit you, that don't make sense, that are not aren't in line with your views or beliefs. That doesn't mean you have to get rid of all of it. Like I said, if you find one thing in that book that helps you, and even if the other, 19 chapters were sucked in your mind, but that one chapter made a difference, then wasn't it still useful? So even though I may not agree with her, she's basically reciting the standard medical views on some of these drugs that I disagree with in part. But I don't know. I think I'll leave it at that. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I had to take a short break there. Run upstairs and use the bathroom. And as I did, I came across my dog Murphy, and he's laying on the floor, eyes closed, with a chew bone still in his mouth, just sticking out from his jowls. It's the cutest thing you ever seen. But I had to mention that. So I wanted to read a little section from her. This is a section called "Recovery is Up to You," and she mentions, "I've observed two types of people who come to her for help." She says the first type says, "I have a problem and it's my fault." These are the ones we can readily help. In fact, the act of taking full responsibility for their problems already places them on the path of recovery. The other type says, "I have a problem and it's somebody else's fault." Responsibility doesn't mean fault, although we still have a hand in it. We did something that got us here. We always have a part in it, but responsibility really means it's your responsibility to find your way out, to fix it, to get better, because nobody else is going to do that for you. I don't know if you hear upstairs. I think it's my dog. If you're hearing knocking, he's, I think, playing with his bone on the floor upstairs. Yeah, like that person said, it's the D and Murphy show. So Murphy is part of this podcast, and I love that. I'm okay with that. She also mentions in this section that research on people with anxiety disorders has revealed that an extremely high percentage have alcoholic parents or difficult childhoods or dysfunctional families or were victims of abuse. I think many of us have been through a difficult time or difficult times. I had an alcoholic parent, a little bit of abuse in my background. I don't want to go into details. I've been through some of that stuff in my childhood, and that affects us. That creates a level of instability. It creates a level of fear, a level that we feel we need now to control things because we never had much control when we were young. We never had a say in it, and so things just kept happening to us, and we couldn't count on anything. I realized by having an alcoholic parent that I had this built-in sense of instability and fear of being alone because I couldn't count on my mother all the time. And that's just part of growing up. And that's we all have that thing that happened in our lives. If not one, maybe multiple, that may have caused us to wind up here, to wind up in a situation where our brains seem to have become our enemy. But they're not. They can be our salvation. Our brains can be what gets us out of it. We just have to get a little help. Have somebody help steer us in the right direction and find a way to start to feel a little better. You are the one who can get you. And the thing is once you've accomplished that, you're the one that did it. And not only does it get you feeling better, but it gives you a sense of pride because you got yourself out of this. You did it. Yes, some people and maybe some books and some tapes and videos helped you along the way, but you're the one that did it. And that confidence just builds on itself, and it starts to help us climb out of that hole. I'm going to close this out with just reading some of the chapters that she has in her book. Actually, before I do that, allow me just a few seconds here to do that whole disclaimer thing.
Hey, this is Dee. Sorry for this brief interruption. I do need to remind everyone that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should never be considered medical, psychological, or professional health advice of any kind. If you or someone you know is dealing with significant mental health issues, please seek professional help. Resources can be found in our show notes and on our website at unevenpodcast.com. And now, back to the podcast.
All right, I'm back. So Part 1, Discovery, the chapters are All Things Are Possible, Chapter 1, which I think is a great way to open that if your dream is to be anxiety-free or at least to manage your anxiety to live a full life, it's possible. It is possible. 2, anxiety, what is it and do you have it? Hey, let's define it. Chapter 3, where do you run when panic attacks? Where do you find that safety? Where do you go to? Like I mentioned before, I always thought I was extroverted, but I'm introverted. As a counselor helped me discover that I have strong extrovert tendencies as I do a podcast, as you know, and like to teach and be in front of people, but I re-energize introverted. I go hide. I go be by myself in the basement. I have to go someplace and turn off all the noise so I can re-energize. Chapter 4, personality traits, variations on the anxious attitude. What are the variety of personalities? That's interesting. 5, I love this one. Anticipatory anxiety, the what-if syndrome. I thought that's really good. I mean, who of us doesn't have the what-if syndrome? I think most of us do. Most of us do. We run those ruminations and we wonder, yeah, but what if this happens? Boy, I'm good at that. Chapter 6, guilt, anger, and blame. So whose fault is it anyway? Good question. Which then leads us into Part 2, Recovery, and Chapter 7, taking responsibility for the way you feel for the rest of your life. That's what I was just mentioning in that previous section of taking responsibility for yourself, for your feelings, for how you respond to things, and not being that person who needs to change everything around them to fit you, but instead that person who is strong and knows I can handle whatever comes my way. Chapter 8, compassionate self-talk. You have to be the one you run to. Yes, we need to have that confidence that I'm the one who can handle these things. I am strong. I can take care of this. And starting to change what we tell ourselves. Chapter 9, the attitude of achievement, cultivating self-esteem, which is key. I do struggle with low self-esteem and have in the past, so I think that's good. Chapter 10, how to stop being disappointed and start getting what you want. That sounds like a good thing. Chapter 11, how to jump off the edge and be your own parachute. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. First of all, jumping off the edge is my problem because I have the fear of heights, so I have to work on that one. Chapter 12, how to keep stress from becoming anxiety. Chapter 13, to medicate or not to medicate. That is the question. As I mentioned before, we might not agree on that chapter, but there might still be some good info in there. And Chapter 14, Leap of Faith, Free at Last. And that's From Panic to Power by Lucinda Bassett. Check it out. If anything I talked about here sounded good to you, maybe you want to go check out that book. But I think these books are good. And I think this series is going to be good. I'll get a little more structured as I go along. I'll try to get, maybe a better way of doing it. But I don't know. I kind of liked it, and I was kind of free in it. Freewheeling it, maybe that's the term. But we'll see what you think. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know, do you like the book report series? Is it something you would like to see more of? And let me know that, if this book might have resonated for you, or maybe you've read it before and maybe you hated it. I want to hear from you. I want to know what your thoughts are, and we can have that discussion. I still want to do more Q&A coming up here soon, so once I've accumulated enough comments from the different sources, I'll do another one of those episodes. And for those who are have been fans of or I've listened to I don't know if fans is not the right word. I don't think anybody here's a fan of my stuff. That sounds so egocentric, and I hate that. I cringe at that thought because I'm nothing special, and maybe that's my low self-esteem, but I'm just a guy who's talking at a podcast, and some people seem to listen to it, and I appreciate that. But anyway, what I was saying was something that I've totally lost track of now, so there goes the brain again. See, that's the negative self-talk, right there. That's the perfect example of negative self-talk right there. Oh, there goes my brain again. I can't remember anything. And I know that's a pattern I should stop doing. I try to make light of it and just accept it because it's who I am. I do have some cognitive dysfunction. I know that from coming off the benzodiazepines. But still, I never had a great memory before. It just got worse, unfortunately. But I do have those brain walls now that I hit, and then I just lose track of what I was saying instantly, and it happens. Um, but I don't. That should not be the focus, and that should not be probably the messages I'm sending myself, because it becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. So I need to work on that. I have a lot to work on. Trust me. Which right there probably is my low self-esteem. See, we learn as we go along, but we can have fun learning, and we can do it together, and we can do it as a group. And who knows, maybe as we get more listeners on this, we'll find a book that I haven't read, and we'll do a book club, and we'll just read it together, and we'll come back and discuss it. Oh, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe a virtual podcast book club at some point where we'll occasionally read or watch a video of somebody that we all like, and you all can recommend to me. Get on the comments and let me know what you have found helpful. I'd love to hear from you. But that's going to wrap this up for the day. I thank you so much for helping me out. Sorry I lost my train of thought there for a second. I don't know where I was going, but it's going to stop where it was because it still hasn't come back to me yet. But thanks for listening, and let me know what you think about the book report. I'm curious. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.